People are trying to figure out William Barr. He's busy wielding. Washington knew not long before Attorney General William P. Barr released the special counsel's report on Russian interference in the 2016 election. He strategized with Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, about one of his next moves investigating the investigators. Over a dinner of steak, potatoes, and carrots in a wood-paneled conference room off Mr. Barr's Justice Department office, the two discussed their shared suspicions that the officials who initially investigated the Trump campaign's links to Russia had abused their powers. They strongly agreed, Mr. Graham said, that maybe one of the most important things we'll ever do is clean up this mess. Less than 2 months later, Mr. Barr began his cleanup with the most powerful of brooms, a presidential order to cooperate with his inquiry, and to declassify and make public their secrets even if they objected. The move illustrates Mr. Barr's swift rise in the pantheon of President Trump's most prominent and loyal allies, and in the eyes of Mr. Trump himself. In a cabinet stock, he is the closest thing we have to Dick Cheney, said Charles J. Cooper, a former senior Justice Department official, referring to President George W. Bush's unusually powerful vice president. He is a strong, but his rising power over the intelligence community has been accompanied by swelling disillusionment with Mr. Barr among former national security officials and ideological moderates. When he agreed late, now they see in him someone who has glossed over Mr. Trump's misdeeds, smeared his investigators, and positioned himself to possibly declassify information for political gain, not the Bill Barr they thought they knew. It is shocking how much he has echoed the president's own statements, said Mary McCord, who led the Justice Department's National Security Division at the end of the Obama administration and the start of the Trump era. I thought he was so which is the real William P. Barr? Is he the upright defender of the presidency who used his discretion nearly all of the, even though it hurt Mr. Trump? Or is he a manipulator? An examination of his record, coupled with interviews of more than 24 associates, suggests elements of both. He is neither as apolitical as his defenders claim, nor as partisan as his detractors fear. Instead, I would describe Barr as a cross between Mr. Wolf, the fixer in Pulp Fiction, and one of the wise men type upper crust figures who believe they protect and shape America, said Ketan Javeri, a former Justice Department official. Defenders like Paul T. Cappuccio, a key advisor to Mr. Barr when he first served as Attorney General under President George Bush, say Mr. Barr is anything but a factotum for Mr. Trump. If I had told you a year ago that President Trump would pick an Attorney General who would not fire Bob Mueller, who would not interfere in his work, and then get the report out promptly with no redactions for executive privilege, he said, you would have told me I was smoking the stuff that's now legal in certain states. Given the president's threat to indiscriminately declassify every document related to the Russia investigation, Mr. Barr's ability to persuade Mr. Trump to outsource those judgments to him is comforting, said Jack Goldsmith, a conservative former senior Justice Department official who has repeatedly criticized Mr. Trump. There is no way to know now what Barr will find in his investigation or whether or how he will use this power, said Mr. Goldsmith, who is also a Harvard Law School professor. But Barr is not. Mr. Barr, 69, declined to be interviewed for this article. He brushes aside, if you had an EKG strapped on Bill Barr, the needle would not have moved at all, said Jonathan Turley, a professor at George Washington University Law School, political independent and longtime friend. The idea that these attacks are having an impact on Bill Barr? He said. These people have long a believer in presidential powers. William Pelham Barr was born May 23, 1950, to a Manhattan family that prized scholarship, Catholicism, and Republican conservatism. His father was a Republican Party district leader in an overwhelmingly Democratic neighborhood. Mr. Barr's father criticized his liberal colleagues as sloppy thinkers with messianic complexes, earning occasional headlines calling him a maverick. Young Bill Barr was also a defender of Republican causes at Horace Mann, the private school he attended in the Bronx. He was conservative, but he came across as thoughtful, not ideologically rigid, Mr. Shern said. He also had he studied at Columbia University, eventually obtaining a master's degree in government and Chinese studies. At a fraternity party, Mr. Barr, who once told a high school counselor he wanted to lead the CIA, began as an intern there. He took night class. He clerked for Malcolm R. Wilkie, a noted conservative judge on the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. 5 years earlier, like the judge, Mr. Barr came to embrace an aggressive view of presidential powers outlined in Bill's natural default is Article 2, said Mr. Turley, a defender of congressional powers defined in Article I. He views a strong executive as more needed than ever to stabilize the country and the world at large. In between stints at a Washington law firm, Mr. Barr worked from 1982 to 1983 at the Reagan White House under C. Boyden Gray, then counsel to Vice President George Bush. Mr. Gray. When Mr. Bush was elected president, Mr. Gray helped elevate Mr. Barr to head the Justice Department's powerful Office of Legal Counsel, whose interpretations of the Constitution and law bind the executive branch unless overruled by the Attorney General or President. Over the next 4 years, as he rose to Deputy Attorney General, then Attorney General, Mr. Barr put into practice his expansive view of the executive branch's authority. He was deeply involved that he did not need lawmakers' approval to unilaterally attack Iraq in the Persian Gulf War of 1991, although he recommended that Mr. Bush seek a resolution of congressional support anyway. In that post-Watergate era, the White House was very deferential to the Justice Department, Mr. Barr set in with the University of Virginia's Miller Center. Once, when Mr. Barr's forte was his administrative skills, said Nancy Baker, a scholar of attorneys general who interviewed him for the Miller Center. He had a comfort level when Attorney General Dick Thornburgh to run for the Senate and Mr. Bush picked Mr. Barr to replace him. The president notified Mr. Barr that the White House would choose a deputy with more political clout than he had. Mr. Barr replied he saw some matters through both a legal and political lens. Immigration law. While he crafted a broad policy agenda, the White House preoccupied with Mr. Bush's re-election campaign mainly ignored it. Largely for that reason, his treatment of independent counsels, a post-Watergate reform, in some ways foreshadowed the division over his handling of the findings of the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III. He abhorred the now, nonetheless, just days before the act was to expire, he to look into charges that administration officials had tampered with passport records of Mr. Bush's opponent in his bid for re-election, Bill Clinton. White House aides were, on the other hand, he strove to put an end to the inquiry of another independent counsel, whom he described as out of control. Lawrence E. Walsh spent almost 7 years investigating how the Reagan administration had secretly sold arms to Iran to win the release of American hostages, then used the profits to secretly arm anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua despite a law cutting off assistance to them. The obstruction of, in his waning days in office, Mr. Bush resolved to pardon Mr. Weinberger. I went over and 6 years later, senior Clinton administration officials were equally critical of the independent counsel Ken Starr's far-flung investigation of Mr. Clinton. But in that case, the attacks on Mr. Starr appear to have the improper purpose of influencing and impeding an ongoing criminal investigation and intimidating possible jurors, witnesses, and even investigators, the 1998 letter said. 21 years, while he periodically opined on other legal and political issues after President Bush's defeat, Mr. Barr concentrated on the corporate work that made him a multimillionaire. Other lawyers Mr. Barr provided the Justice Department with information to block mergers of competitors that might create unfair monopolies and harm his company, said Mr. Javeri, a former antitrust lawyer with the Justice Department's Telecommunications Task Force. With a lot of help from a few years later, after GTE became Verizon, Mr. Barr to vanquish the competition again. A former engineer, then he took his case to federal regulators and to James B. Comey, then the United States Attorney in Manhattan. He also lobbied it. By 2012, Mr. Barr had been semi-retired for 3 years, serving on corporate boards, traveling and Then, she said in an interview that her father tackled her illness as if he were deconstructing a complex legal case. When standard treat, always thick-skinned, she said, her father emerged from
raindrop, drip, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot.